Welcome to the Movement at Mainframe, a series that features Des Moines area artists and the largest nonprofit art studio facility in the nation. When you stop to think, Des Moines has an incredibly vibrant arts scene. From the Civic Center to the Arts Center or the Botanical Garden, arts and culture are alive and well in central Iowa. But if you're a local artisan, where do you go to find an affordable space to develop and produce your creations? That's where Mainframe Studios enters the picture. Mainframe Studios is a nonprofit organization located on Keogh Way in downtown Des Moines. This space is a 36-year-old, 5-story building that was originally a telephone company data center. Upon reopening in late 2017, Mainframe included 75 shareable studios on 3 of the 5 floors. Another floor of artists has recently finished construction, and now Mainframe is home to well over 100 creative spaces. Mainframe hosts regular First Friday events where the public is invited. Here's Mainframe's manager, Sabrina Carper, with an update.
So in March of this year, we finished our 3rd floor of studios in the building. So we added an additional 50 studios, moved in an additional 50 artists, and we only have 1 floor of studios remaining until we've finished our capital campaign. At the same time, we started a new mural project. It's a 360-degree mural on the outside of the building designed by Molly Spain. And we've painted 3 sides of the building. We've just started painting along Keogh Way, and we expect the whole thing to be finished in August when we'll have a mural completion celebration for our August First Friday event. So Molly Spain has a background in architecture, and so when she started designing the mural, she really approached it by researching the architecture of the building, which is very brutalist. She was really inspired by the geometric block style of our building, and so she used some of her own work with totems and elemental design, and created some stacked black totems representing the stacks of creative entrepreneurs in our building. And she wanted to add some movement to the facade of the building, because when you have these big gray walls, it can be hard to see what a creative space it is inside. So she added colorful repetitions of these totem shapes to really represent how much vibrancy we have inside our building. So we're currently fundraising for completion of our 2nd floor of studios, which is actually our final floor of studios. The Lauritsen family has pledged $1 million match. So all donations right now are effectively doubled. And once we finish fundraising, then we can start construction of 2nd floor. We anticipate 2nd floor being finished in late 2022. And once we move in those 50 new artists, we'll be at full capacity, and our capital campaign will be finished, and we will be the largest nonprofit studio building in the nation.
Let's take a short break before we meet an artist who will lead us into the realm of magic, dragons, and urban fantasy. A self-taught illustrator, comic book fan, and avid Dungeons & Dragons role player, Tyler Walpole has been working in the entertainment industry since the year 2000. His clients include Marvel Studios, DC Comics, and Magic: The Gathering.
I've been working in the comic book and entertainment industry for a number of years. I do a lot of tabletop gaming, so I've worked for Marvel Productions doing character artworks for promotions for a lot of the movies. Captain America: Civil War was probably the first one that I worked on, and also Guardians of the Galaxy, a few others. Mainly what I do these days is I do artwork for Magic: The Gathering. It's a popular card game that's been around since the mid-90s, so a number of years now. I was playing it in high school, so I'm embarrassed to say how long it's been around. Makes me feel old. And I'm all over the place when it comes to medium. My background was as a comic book illustrator, trying to do pencils and inks. Eventually I started adding colors to those digitally. And then I had for a number of years a career just doing fully digitally painting. In recent years I've started doing oil painting and gouache, and recently I did a series of illustrations that was sort of an homage to the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon for Magic the Gathering, where I actually painted them as kind of like reproductions of animation cells. So I painted acrylic on the back of acetate over inked line work, and then layered those over the top of a gouache painted background. So, and gouache is like an opaque watercolor. It's just something that I have been driven to do since I was a little kid. You know, when I was supposed to be paying attention in class, I was making cartoons in the margins, and it was just, yeah. And then at home, I'd be watching TV and drawing while I was watching Saturday morning cartoons, and I just never got over it. I just kept going. I did not study art. I don't have any formal training in art. I just kept working at it, and I don't like to use a lot of people would say self-taught, but I don't like that term. I've depended on learning from lots of my contemporaries over the years, just doing work, showing it to them, getting critiques and how I can improve, and just doing the work and studying. So I started out pursuing a career as a comic book artist, doing pencils and inks, and I got a few gigs early on, but it was not really paying the bills very well. So one year I switched to, instead of going to the big comic book convention, which was Wizard World Chicago back in the day, I decided one year to create a portfolio to show to tabletop gaming publishers, like Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. And I went to Gen Con back then it used to be in Milwaukee. And I took my portfolio around to every single art director that I could find, and on the convention floor. And I got a couple of people that were interested, and one of them gave me work the very next week. So that was the humble beginnings. I had just a couple of freelance gigs, and I just kept doing that over and over and over until I, improved my portfolio and got enough work contacts to be able to stay busy most of the time. So. Blood of Dragons is my urban fantasy project that I've been working on for a number of years. Actually, I'm hoping to make it my main focus starting this fall. I'm going to be working on putting together a comic book pitch and shopping that around to different publishers and stuff. So basically, it's urban fantasy, but with a lot of dragons involved. Mainframe's been just an amazing addition to the Des Moines community. I believe it's the largest nonprofit art studios in the country. So this is, well, at least once it's all full up and the final floor is done with renovations. And yeah, it's been amazing just to be able to get to be here and meet other artists and other creators that are here. And yeah, there's not been a lot of collaboration for me so far, but that's just because most of my clients are like out on the coasts. But I've talked with a couple of people in the building about possibly doing some things down the road, schedule allowing. Typically, for an illustration for like Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons, something like that, the art director will send me a description of what they want to see in the image, and a lot of times it's accompanied by a lot of reference material. They'll have like a style guide for that product or the setting. So I'll review all of that, and then I do a number of thumbnail sketches, and I send those to the art director, and then usually they pick one, or sometimes they'll pick two and say, combine these two elements from these two thumbnails, and then I work up a final sketch that is kind of a roadmap of where the final illustration is going to go, and then once that's approved, I transfer that to a board. If I'm working traditionally, I transfer it to a board, and then I proceed to spend like the next week and a half doing an oil painting of it. If I do it digitally, it's a lot faster, but then I also don't end up with an artifact to hold at the end of the process. So yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, everything from like I said, I grew up watching cartoons, so I love 2D animation, so anime, that kind of thing. And comic books, I just grew up reading a lot of comic books, so artists like Jim Lee, Mike Mignola, John Byrne. I mean, anything I see is a source of inspiration. If it catches my eye, it just kind of goes into the databanks, so it's all swimming around in there. I've really been getting back into playing Dungeons and Dragons just with my friends, like hanging out and rolling some dice and telling a story. So and then watching movies, and when I have time, reading comics. Usually I just buy them and they stack up in my house, and someday I'll read them. Best piece of advice I've gotten as an artist was honestly to do the work that excites you. If you're trying to find work from clients, you can try and match your style to what you think they need, but if you do stuff that really excites you, even if it's different than what everybody else in the field is doing, you're going to stand out, and that's what is going to attract clients, and they will hire you to do the thing that you want to do, which is much, much better long-term than learning how to do what they're already doing and catering to that need. So I don't know, I've had a lot of people that really respond to the Blood of Dragons stuff. When I started doing some of my own stuff a few years ago, like doing the Blood of Dragons, when I had a wall full of like Marvel art and Magic the Gathering art and novel covers and stuff that people already showed up with, they were already fans of that property, and they started choosing my original stuff over that. That was just, that was a pretty tremendous feeling. So, I'm hoping this fall to make Blood of Dragons my focus, putting together my comic book pitch and shopping it around to publishers. And I would love to start working on that next year on a full-time basis. And then, Magic is a great client, and I love working on that game, so I want to keep that going as long as possible. But at the end of the day, like you want to make something that you own, right? Rather than just working on stuff for clients. So I feel like I'm at a point in my career where I can take my shot at least and see what happens. So that's that's the horizon for me.
To see more of Tyler's work, visit these social media sites. We'll take a short break before we explore the whimsy of one artist's use of watercolor in children's book illustrations. In 2019, Claire Sedovic realized a lifelong dream of becoming a published children's book author and illustrator. Claire is a former artist in residence of Drake's Studio Fellowship program at Mainframe. Working primarily in graphite and watercolor, she aims to create art that not only fulfills her artistic goals, but also resonates with and brings joy to children.
I am primarily a children's book illustrator. My background, however, is in graphic design. I graduated from Drake in 2015 with a BFA in design. And since then, I've worked in the design industry here in Des Moines, but I've always wanted to illustrate children's books and even write them myself. So that's kind of been a lifelong pursuit, one of which that I got a little bit further in and published my first book in 2019 with Blue Manatee Press as the illustrator, and that's Odd Animal ABCs. And then since then, I've been working on a lot of books that I've written and illustrated myself. Nothing that's been published yet, but a lot of things on the back burner. And then most recently this summer, I've been illustrating a book for a local author who is going to be publishing probably hopefully within the next 6 months or so. And that's a personal story to her about her father-in-law, who in the 90s planted 12,000 trees on his property in a span of a week alone, and since then earned his Master Woodland Manager's badge. Something that I didn't expect to get into is teaching. I, since last fall, have been an adjunct instructor at Grandview University, teaching primarily drawing courses, a Drawing 1 and a Drawing 2, so introductory and intermediate classes to college students. So first of all, I just feel extremely fortunate to be in this space. It's such a unique thing here in Des Moines, frankly, here in the state or the entire country. When it's all complete, it'll be literally one of a kind in the nation. So that's a pretty cool thing to be in Des Moines and be a part of that. And frankly, it's thanks to hard work on my part, of course, but really to my connections with Drake that I'm here in the first place. I came to Mainframe in 2019 now, because it's been a little over 2 years, as the Drake Alumni Studio resident. So basically Drake sponsored me to do a body of work in that studio on the 4th floor for the duration of a year. And that was a great experience for me. It was something I had to apply for and actually tried twice to get, and second time was the charm. So since then, I talked to Siobhan, the director here at Mainframe, and said, you know, everyone here has been so welcoming to me. I love this community. I want to stay here. And she was, you know, always readily willing and happy to help people stay here if they got in through the residency or something else. And I basically kind of hopped around and shared a studio with another artist for some time on the 4th floor before the 3rd floor renovations were complete. Everyone here was just always very welcoming to me. I got to know my neighbors very well upstairs. Siobhan in general has always been really open to having artists highlight some of their work at the First Friday events, whether that's something you offer up yourself or, hey Claire, would you like to, you know, do XYZ? It's been a really great way to get to know the artists here and also the community in Des Moines that cares about art when they come and visit. With watercolor in particular, I took a class on children's book illustration in Italy, actually. I took a semester studying abroad from Drake and had a really fabulous instructor there. And we didn't work primarily with watercolor all semester long, but it was a couple of projects. And I guess that when I think back, maybe that was the start of it. You know, I think a lot of kids probably have their Crayola palette that they use in elementary school. But for me, maybe that just reminded me that I really enjoyed it as a medium. And then when I started working as a graphic designer at a marketing firm here in Des Moines, I think for me it was a great way to kind of relax at the end of the day and kind of release a little bit of that stress. I find painting to be really relaxing, and I just did a lot of it in those first few years after graduating from school, and I've stuck with it ever since. Typically my process includes a lot of drawing to begin with, so I do a lot of detail with graphite, but primarily it's painting, and yeah, that's kind of been my one true love with art for a couple of years now, more than a couple of years. So in 2018, I decided that it had been a long time coming, but it was time to kind of make that leap, so to speak. So I ended up putting in my 2 weeks at my graphic design job, and without really having much of a plan, and to my family that was not me at all. I'm very much sort of by the books, plan things out sort of a person, but it felt right and I've never looked back. So I quit that job, and then serendipitously, probably about a month, maybe less than a month after I quit that job, a publisher reached out to me, Blue Manatee Press. They're from Cincinnati, Ohio, and they do a lot of great educational books for kids. They reached out and said, hey, we have this book, Odd Animal ABCs, or rather we have a manuscript, I should say, that we just acquired from the author, and it's a really quick turnaround. We'd love to get this out next spring, but you know, we reached out to some other illustrators. Would you consider sending us some spec work? And to me, that was, you know, not quite a dream come true. I didn't have the project yet, but to be asked what seemed like kind of out of the blue to do that, especially after I quit a job, yeah, that was kind of amazing to me. So long story short, I did the spec work, and they liked it, and they said, great, let's work with you. So about, I guess that's less than a year later, May of 2019, Odd Animal ABCs was published. So I'm hoping to work with that publisher again. I know I'm on their roster of illustrators. I keep in touch with that editor. So just as an illustrator in general, kind of putting your feelers out there, that's really how they found me in the first place, is through social media, posting on Instagram or having a website that is a great portfolio of your work and your style. That's how interested publishers or agents, that's how they find you. Typically I'll start with creating thumbnails, so small sketches to kind of figure out the pacing of the book, knowing how one page is going to lead into the next. Page turns are really important. And thinking back to my semester in Italy when I studied with that particular instructor, she really talked about how illustrations can help slow a book down or slow a reader down to get them to kind of stop on a page and enjoy it a little bit more than just reading the text and moving on. So from there, kind of collaborate with the author back and forth. You know, did she like where I was headed with this? And if we're both solid on that, then I'll move on to doing some rougher sketches and then maybe polishing those a little bit more, at which point I'll scan in my polished drawing. I say polished, but it's still, you know, I've erased a lot. It's got marks on it. I want to clean it up a little bit because I work on Arches watercolor paper, which is really nice stuff, and I don't want to muck that up by drawing on it directly. So I scan in my drawing, and then from there I clean up that sketch in Photoshop a little bit by dropping out the background and erasing some areas that have smudges and such. And then from there I have a printer that will take my really thick watercolor paper and I run it through the printer. And then what I end up with is a very light, I take it down to about like 80–85% opacity when I print it. So I have a printed, clean version of my original drawing, and then I paint on top of that. And then the very last thing, working by hand, is adding detail with graphite on top of that. And then from there, basically I scan it in and then maybe do a little color work to boost and enhance saturation in Photoshop. Yeah, so that really differs between, my first book was published traditionally, AKA with a publisher in and of themselves, right? The second book is going to be self-published. So the author, it's something that a lot of people do these days. The author has a bunch of different avenues where she could go to publish that. It basically is a quicker turnaround. A book traditionally published can take up to 2 years typically. So working the traditional way, you really don't have, as an illustrator, so much collaboration with the author. Typically, the author sells their manuscript to the publisher, and the publisher, as the art director and the editor, will work with the author and kind of come up with some ideas for how it might be illustrated, and then they reach out to the illustrator. And it's really a collaboration between illustrator and editor or art director, which was mostly the case with Odd Animal ABCs. This, working with Teresa for The Wandering Woodsman, is a little bit different and fun in the respect that, you know, she and I can have more of a direct collaboration. And she has a really good eye for it as well. So it's been fun to bounce ideas off of one another for it. So this is The Wandering Woodsman on my wall here that I've been working on this summer. So it's nearly at completion. What you see up there, most of the pages are pretty true to how they will look as a spread. You can see them 2 by 2. Some of them I get a little creative with how I use my watercolor paper so as not to waste space. So some of them are images that have been kind of pulled apart in Photoshop and used in different areas of the book. But that's near completion. I'm currently working on the cover right now, and that'll be the last probably the last big portion of that. Hopefully within the next few weeks, the author and I will get that done, and then kind of the rest of it's up to her to move forward with that once I send her the final drawings. My parents read to my sister and I both so much as kids, so we were avid readers as kids, I still am. So picture books as a kid are still picture books that I love as an adult. So I'm always going back to illustrators and authors I liked. Peggy Rathman, if you know, Bootsy Barker Bites, or Goodnight Gorilla. Those are some titles you might know. I love her style. Rosemary Wells or Holly Hobby. Those are a couple that are ones that I think, especially if they work in watercolor, that my style is a little bit more akin to. You know, for me, I feel like it can be kind of a little bit cliche to say, but other people have described my work this way as whimsical, and I actually do really agree with that. I think if I look at illustrators that I mentioned that I have inspiration from, it kind of fits within that same realm as well. I think a lot of illustrators, most of us, if we work for children's books, you know, we're trying to kind of tap into that child within inside of us. So for me, I think kind of finding that sense of whimsy is something that I'm always striving to do in my pieces. I had a lot of great mentors in my life, still do, who've given me good advice. One that I think I've been thinking about recently, because I have not done a lot of Instagram posts or anything this summer in particular. I think it was probably another fellow illustrator told me, you know, if you're posting on social media all the time, you're probably not doing the work, right? So it's more important that you get the work done than, you know, always be that person posting. And some people can balance both really well. For me this summer, it's just been such a joy to be here at Mainframe every morning doing the work that I've kind of let that slide a little bit. And for me, that's the balance I find, and you know, it works for me. Dream project, like I said, I worked on writing as well as illustrating some of my own stories, so I would love to one day see those come to fruition. With children's books and just writing in general, it really is something that most people just don't jump right into, especially right out of college. It's something that you kind of work on over years, and you have hopefully a critique group that you meet with, or you go to conferences. There's a great community for that, both here in Iowa and nationally, that I'm a part of. It's the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, the long acronym of SCBWI. But they have chapters in every state, and I joined them actually pretty simultaneously with working on odd animal ABCs. So it was kind of, you know, learning how to build the wheel while driving the car at the same time. So they were a great support while I was working on my first book, and I've gone to multiple conferences and events with them since then. And I don't think I'd be where I am without them. I have my critique group, illustrator friends through that community, so much, and everyone is so welcoming within that space. There's nothing else I'd rather be doing, frankly. I mean, like I said, it's been such a joy to be here. Frankly, a lot more this summer in this studio, now that it's new to me in my permanent space, than being in the Drake studio or kind of squatting in someone else's studio earlier on the 4th floor while I waited. But yeah, I mean, it's what I feel like I'm meant to be doing here. It's what feels right. It's what I enjoy.
To see more of Claire's work, visit these social media sites. Thanks for watching this episode of Movement at Mainframe on MC22. In the following weeks, we'll be featuring more Des Moines artists and their unique talent. For more information on the artists, visit mainframestudios.org.